Jordan Peele may be best known for his comedy, Key and Peele, and obviously his hugely successful horror films, including Get Out, Nope, and others. But now he's part of the team that produced a new docuseries on the role of black cowboys in the Wild West. Have a look.
The black cowboy was intentionally removed from the story so that we can create the myth of the American white cowboy.
As soon as cowboy became a cool thing was exactly when they took that from us.
Land is everything. Land is freedom. Land is power.
It was just stolen. That's a heist.
Country music is black music. Has it been stolen? Has it been heisted? Is there anything black people have made that hasn't been heisted?
You rewrote the history. We are just going back and straightening the story out.
To reclaim what was stolen from us.
Now, that was from a new docuseries from executive producer Jordan Peele on black cowboys in the Old West. I want to bring in Eric Deggans. He's the critic at large for NPR, also Knight Professor of Journalism at Washington and Lee University. Thanks for being with us. You know, one of the central questions in this series is who erased the history of the black cowboy? How does the show address that question?
Well, what's interesting is that this docuseries uses that question as a gateway to talk about a lot of ways in which systemic racism and prejudice were used to erase people from black history or erase people from American history, black people from American history, and also co-opt black culture and make it seem as if elements of cowboy culture and elements of country and Western culture were entirely created from white culture, as opposed to the contributions that would be made by black people and by Native Americans and Latinos. And so what's interesting is this docuseries starts with that question of, you know, why did I never see black cowboys, for example, in Western films or in Western TV shows, and expands it to talk about how, you know, concepts like manifest destiny, this idea that white European descendants were destined to take over America, and it justified their seizing of land from black people and indigenous people across the United States. How systems like that were used to disenfranchise people of color and co-opt the strides that they made in horse racing, in raising horses and cattle, in enforcing the law in frontier towns. There was a famous lawmaker named Bass Reeves, who some consider to be the inspiration of the Lone Ranger. And yet, we've always seen the cowboy as this sort of stern, upright white male, and never considered that black people actually pioneered that way of life, long before any of the stories that we saw.
Well, I just wanted to talk about, sort of that dynamic that you touched on, sort of the role of Hollywood in sort of this portrayal and ideal of, as you mentioned, the white cowboy. The idea of the white cowboy is basically the idea of a cowboy, period, as far as sort of pop culture goes. And, for those that saw the movie Nope, it's sort of interesting, horses were pretty key in that movie, and you saw Daniel Kaluuya at points, or Keke Palmer, both black, obviously, but sort of their relationship with the horse and sort of that cowboy atmosphere in some parts of that movie. It kind of stands out, right, in sort of how Hollywood has typically portrayed the American cowboy.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things going on there. Number one, I think in a democracy, when you've accepted that racial oppression is something that's undesirable, the way in which you assert white supremacy is to sort of lodge it in places where you don't talk about race. So cowboy culture and country and Western culture has always been thought of as sort of this repository of white culture. It's just never articulated that way. People never talk about the racial dimensions of it. But there's been a systematic exclusion of black people from that story, in part because I think white filmmakers were uncomfortable with depicting how black people and indigenous people were oppressed during that time. But they were very much a part of these stories. And then you look at Hollywood, and you see that so many major film stars got their start in Westerns on film and TV. People like Jimmy Stewart and John Wayne and Clint Eastwood and Steve McQueen. And so you see that there's a ladder to success in Hollywood that was denied to Black actors because Black characters were excluded from these stories. And so there's a way in which you can see that this simple decision to not talk about how Black people existed in the American West can have far-reaching consequences and make it even tougher for Black actors nowadays to get work.
And I was just going to say, just quickly before we go, the show also talks about the history of Black Americans and country music. It seems like it fits along some of the themes that you were just talking about.
Exactly. It's hard to accept that country music had strong roots in Black culture because, again, of the way that Black artists were systematically excluded from that area of the industry as well. But, thankfully, we have modern artists like Beyonce who are willing to come along and remind everyone that there aren't just, people like Charlie Pride weren't just anomalies, that there is a strong, roots in Black culture for country music. And again, it's all about sort of making sure that people face the truth of America, which is that Black people and Indigenous people have contributed to American culture in a ton of ways, and no one racial group owns that culture. And when we can acknowledge how, even government programs like the New Deal, for example, excluded people of color and made it harder for Black families to retain wealth, which had then, again, excluded them from these stories, we can see how we can dismantle those systems and make it easier for people of color today to enjoy the fruits of the culture that they helped create.
It's important perspective. People will obviously, I think, learn a lot with this docuseries. And Eric, appreciate you being here. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you for having me.